What is going on, everybody, and welcome to another technical analysis that I do weekly on Sundays to give you entries and exits on things I'm looking at to take potential position for the week. So if that sounds like something you're interested in, consider subscribing, as I do also provide a weekly analysis where I go over current events for the week to get you prepared for the week ahead. And also, I do provide daily marks on the market. If that's something you're interested in, you can follow me at X at Hemi137 as well. So let's go ahead and get started with the technical analysis. As we've seen, we've essentially, since we've pivoted, the market has been running up to an extent. We are starting to get very choppy when it comes to making new all-time highs. I do reference this a lot to the 2021, when the market essentially going into the final quarter of the year was quite choppy because a lot of uncertainty. And this is why I do talk about events a lot as well, because you need to know what's currently going on with uncertainty. If the market isn't sure what's going on for the next 6 months, the market really doesn't do too much. And so this is why you've seen a lot of low volume over the past couple months. People are just waiting for the election to follow through. So with that being said, as you can see, we're in price discovery mode, but it has been a very, very choppy price discovery mode. Expecting at some point that the market would try to come back down to roughly where that 56.31 to do a retest. This channel is still in development as far as this upper channel here. So I think we can potentially still hit the 6K mark to follow up the end of the year. And then from that point, I think, again, all stops are essentially pulled from there, and then we will correct, I think, from that point. So it's not saying that it will, but I think as far as probabilities and the manipulation that goes on, I think we still have a strong potential possibility of hitting 6K before the end of the year. And then I think we'll start correcting again, like I said, in the new year, normally around that normal cycle around February, March time period. So as of right now, again, price discovery mode, we really don't have anything to mark to the upside. We're just kind of letting this branch develop. But ultimately, we would like a retest. If you want this to remain bullish, you want some sort of pullback. This week could potentially provide that with some events. This is why I suggest you check out the other video and look into that as to why this could potentially at least do a retest this week. We do have non-farms as well. So, but this is what we're currently looking at. Price discovery mode, not expecting this to really explode to the upside. I think, again, there's a lot of promise. There's hope. I think that Tesla could potentially help with this push to the upside, but you're starting to see a lot of weakness across a lot of different aspects, commodities, as well as the different industries as well. So, but you do have support roughly around this area, around the 54.38 as well. So if we end up breaking this, we can come all the way down, I believe. Seeing as we're going daily, we could potentially come down to the 54.60 potentially. But if it breaks that point, then I think we could be in some trouble here. On the monthly, this looked like a very more promising wedge. I try to align this more with what it looked like on the daily, but ultimately right now, you are having a very, very big ascending wedge here. And I talk about this, how this is typically played out over the past couple of years. Most other technicals do not play out. This is why you use supply and demand a lot, but the most technicals haven't really played out aside for the ascending wedge, and essentially that correcting 75% of the move. So again, looking roughly just under that 4,800, I think, is where we can correct once this thing starts to correct. Again, depending on what the sediment is to that, again, I think could play even more to the downside. And I did mark this for that 42%. Again, this is going to be adjusted depending on how we finish out the year. Like I said, if we come up to that 6K mark before the end of the year, I think you could probably push this up a little bit higher, but that's just on average for a recession. So just keep that in mind. It's not saying it will hit that, but that's kind of the target to potentially watch. Again, you've had, this is the 2022 year, which I reference a lot because I think we will get a lot of that going into the new year. When you get events occur and then you realize that inflation's getting high, unemployment's getting high, you're going to see some of these larger red candles as Again, we've paused here since October last year, and that's essentially what you typically see as a cycle to the upside. So that's what we're currently watching on the SPX. So again, it's not very eventful on SPX as of right now, because you are waiting. The market is again choppy because you're waiting for elections to finish, and then once that's completed, then you should get some more volatility after that point. But again, you're in the last quarter of the year, which is typically a bullish. Not saying it will be, but it's always good to have a frame of reference when you're looking at these charts. So now, that being said, let's take a look at Bitcoin. So Bitcoin, again, gaining steam. It's good to kind of look at this monthly. You're kind of making a big bull flag here. We'll see if that does play out. It's been a larger bull flag, something I haven't really seen in um, Bitcoin in a while. But you look at these higher time frames, and it's a very solid bull flag. Looking for one more retest down here at the 51 level. Like I said, when we're pressing a recession, everything will sell at that point. It doesn't matter what market you're trading in; it will all be corrected at that point. So again, still watching this. That 70. I think this could potentially even push up. You do wick up after this a little bit within the monthly. And then I could see this correcting back down again, like I said, to the 49, maybe even lower. I've referenced potentially hitting the 38 briefly. Could be a strong possibility before we get a higher high, or it might break out. Again, it's hard to tell. You never really know for sure, but it is developing a big bullish flag to the upside, which could put us at that 100K. Not saying it will, or there's any guarantees. So you got to be very careful because you've already made this explosive move up already. That's essentially been about 180% already. So again, you do have to be very careful on this explosive move up. A lot of people are saying it could go a millions. You have to kind of not be too wishful or too greedy on these things, especially if you've bought them out and you've bought around these areas. I bought a lot around this, the 25 mark before the explosion, and then kind of just waiting for one last push, but ultimately understand again that you got to keep expectations tapered to some extent on this, even though this is becoming a very big bull flag. I think you could potentially reach for that, but this last push up would be the take profit ultimately on that, unless you're holding for Bitcoin for different reasons as to the sentiment of why Bitcoin was actually created, and that's different. But ultimately, again, looking to see if we can break out here. So you're ultimately watching this wedge. What you want this to do is on monthly candles is to actually break above this and hold above this. Once it does break, looking for a brief touchback and then potentially start running up. So that's what you're looking for, a solid break on this bullish wedge here. So I do want to keep that in mind. But ultimately, as of right now, I mean, you could adjust this potentially even on these higher markers. It looks much more clear. Having more of a fanning kind of sediment. So like I said, you could briefly even go down to the 40K mark. I think, like I said, you always could get a lower pullback. Again, you want this to at least try to correct 50, 75% of this move, 65% of the move before you want a larger pullback. You don't want it to just go parabolic like this, even though it can get quite like that with Bitcoin with the volatility. But again, ultimately understand, I think we do have a very bullish run coming, but you're going to have one last liquidation spike, and then I think you're going to push up moving forward. So let's take a look at TLT. Now, TLT, I've talked about this. It did break out, so it did look like it topped out roughly around the 100 mark and started breaking down below that trend. And now did a retest. We'll see if this thing starts to sell back off, but back down to the 93. Again, for this to really start making massive moves to the upside, what you need is a lot of momentum to rate cuts. And there's already talk about potentially another 50-point basis move cut here in November. Again, if you get a couple back-to-back 50, 75 points, that's going to really start causing this thing to start skyrocketing to the upside. But again, you have to ultimately understand, you have to wait and see what it's looking like at this point, because even though you get these channel breakouts haven't been the best, they've been heavily manipulated. Typically they've been pulling back into these channels and pushing. So but as of right now, what it looks like is we have broken out, and so we're just going to have to continue to watch and see how this does play out moving forward. But again, right now it needs to hold that 98 mark. If it does break below that, could look for this thing to dive all the way back down to 93. So you have to be very mindful of that. I have been talking about watching TLT and watching essentially commodities, and both have been heavily manipulated lately. And so you do have to keep that in mind. But I do believe there will be a bigger move for these particular commodities, especially these particular asset classes after the fact, when we start talking about after the elections. So, but again, as of right now, we'll see if this thing could even potentially retest up to the 100 mark. And then, like I said, if there starts to be, this is very event-based driven, so you do have to keep that in mind. So an event could come out where they emergency rate cut and this thing jumps way up. Could be a potential possibility. I don't think they're going to do that during the only under 40 days from the election. I don't think they're going to be doing that, but it could potentially happen. So just keep that in mind. That's what we're looking at there. So again, very critical levels here for TLT moving forward. Take a quick look at gold here. Gold has gone absolutely parabolic with no pullbacks. And like I said, once everything starts, when you start worrying and panic, gold builds up for the anticipation of it. And then once that event actually occurs, it sells off just like everything else. So watching this thing to start selling off back down to at least retest the 231 here at some point. Again, building up, there's a lot of anticipation of what's going on. So this is why you're getting this to skyrocket, because there's a lot of fear in the market. But again, at some point it will correct. So just be mindful of that. So right now you can't really flag psychological levels. It's roughly trying to hit the 250. And then you got the 260. And then we'll see what happens from there. But definitely it's been very parabolic. It's been a long time since we've really seen gold break out like this. So again, but a lot of worry and concern. So that's your current levels of support is the 230. And then again, you're looking at monthly time frames here. So gold doesn't move again that quite dramatically. So just keep that in mind. It takes a whole month for this thing to really start breaking out, but over time it does do well. With what's going on in the current situation. So starting to roll over. We'll see if this thing does retest back down to the 230. That'd be great for an entry for potentially one last run before, like I said, we don't really know how the market is going to go on during forward after the election. That's something we have to judge once that time comes. But ultimately, that's what you're kind of looking at there. Then for Tesla's back here. We need Tesla to break the 263. If it can break there, this thing really can go parabolic. Have driven this multiple times. You've had this huge wedge, which it looks like it's been trying to break out. We'll see if this thing pulls back. If for some reason there's any more delays and robotaxi stuff, that could be a problem. But it seems like we're locked in for 1010. If that's the case, this thing can potentially reclaim up to another 100 points to the 356. But we'll see what happens there. It'd be nice if this thing does pull back briefly to the 226. Again, I think if what happens with the market correctional recession, I think this can hold. I do believe it can still hold at 200 nonetheless. I think these are your last kind of pivot points here. You may get a brief stint under 200 once that occurs, depending on who goes in office, and anything potentially happening with Elon could change this dramatically too. So you need to be careful with that. But that is my only concern about Tesla. If any particular person does come into office, especially with his current dealings with X. So just keep that in mind. But as of right now, it's still looking very bullish. We'll see what happens here. But That was our last potential drop over 200 may have been right there. We have to see again. It's priced in a lot and really hasn't done a lot over the past year. But this is typical Tesla. It has a lot of build up before it has big parabolic moves. So just keep that in mind. But as of right now, it's looking pretty solid as far as the foundation. We'll see what it can do on this level here. This 262 has really been a tough level. It's crept up to 300. So you do have a level up here at the 300 mark as well. But that's kind of been the cap. So we'll see what we can do. Robo taxis may push us up to the 300. But again, once we price in, ultimately once we price in that recession, to kind of see where this may lie on top of that. But ultimately, we don't get too far ahead of ourselves. And then our support roughly being here at the 230 mark. Let's drop this back down to the daily. So we have pretty solid support here at the 230 mark. And then your next level at the 205. But right now we're shooting if we can break above this. So this week will be important. If we can break up over that, and then I think we're headed to the 320. So this maybe you want to watch as long as we can hold above that to get that. But you're starting to get this massive push again because of the robo-taxi stuff is starting to build momentum. So again, this can get quite parabolic very quickly. So you do want to be watching this moving into the next couple days with the robo-taxi stuff just a couple weeks away. Then you got Palantir. Palantir, still very parabolic. It doesn't really push to the upside too much till earnings. Once it has earnings, then it kind of really gets a lot of momentum. So we'll see their earnings is still roughly about 2 months away. If I'm reading that correctly, it should be around when next earnings is. So got about a month away. About a month away, you might be able to get some more parabolic move out of this. It's been absolutely parabolic, so just kind of really watching this. So this is current level, expecting some sort of potential pullback to the 35, maybe even the 32. Now to retest this channel and then potentially continue to push up. So watching that there. Take a look at Amazon. Amazon holding this level currently right now at the 187 mark. See if it can hold there and bounce back, do a retest going into earnings to the 200. Again, if they miss or anything, which I'm expecting a lot of these to pull back once earnings actually starts again, could potentially see a massive drop like this for earnings again, as I think you're going to get more bad news. And so despite this recovery, because you have a lot of Fed members and everything talking about strong and resilient, when you have earnings, that reflects differently. So expecting some sort of move like this to happen. If that's the case, could even dive lower to 124 or maybe just even 144, but we'll have to watch and see how this does play out moving forward. But again, your ceiling being at 200, I don't expect us to break that until we get actual earnings, and then could potentially see where we go from that point. PayPal, let's look at PayPal. I've talked about PayPal all along this time when this was hitting the 58 mark. Now we're at 80, but we have started to sell off quite a bit. Would really like this to come down to do a stronger retest. It did do a retest at the 67 here briefly and then started going parabolic. So your next support level really is 75. If it can hold 75, it's building a nice bullish structure back to the upside. So really kind of watching that. And again, you got major support right here at the 68 mark. So if it does want to pull back, it can pull back to 68. We'll watch it there. It's again been in this channel, so it's got a lot of support and very strong support around this level. So just keep that in mind. If it does for some reason break the 67 mark here and it drop down to the 59, very solid, very good supports to be buying around here for PayPal. So just keep that in mind. I still do very like PayPal moving forward. SoFi is the same way. It's been consolidating a lot very nicely around here. Ideally, I would really like this back down to the 646 to look for entries again. But again, we have to see. You have to be very careful, especially when you're talking about banks and potentially recessions. And so that's something you do need to keep in mind moving forward. It can go potentially lower. It has been quite choppy for quite a few years, but again, it's had some of the best growth rates out of a lot of different stocks. Just keep that frame of reference here. But at 650 is a very solid support. This is typically a pretty decent support, roughly around here at the 770 marks. Just keep that in mind. Going into earnings, we might push up at least to the $9 mark moving forward. But again, we have to see where this thing lands when we start doing pricing in recession. Now, ELF, I've been talking about ELF since last week. I really like this position. You can expect it potentially to drop down to the 88 mark. If it can't hold the current level, which is the 115, has been really solid. There's been a lot of consolidation. The growth rates on this are amazing. It was doing growth rates at essentially around that 74%. This is why you've had all this parabolic move to where it has been up to as of right now. That's why you've had these parabolic moves because it's had like the it was going 30, 40, and then 70%. That's why you hit the 220. Still growing at roughly around that 40% or just over 40%, which is amazing, especially for any company. But the utopic at 70% isn't going to always be sustainable. So once that is, I think they've kind of hit price stability. All I think this thing is going to take is one solid earnings, and this thing's going to push right back up. So I am positioning in this as well. So I really do like that. Their earnings is roughly around just 11.6, so just a little over a month, and we'll start get some ELF earnings. Again, if they do very well, I think this thing can go parabolic, potentially back up to at least the 160 pretty quickly, and then potentially, again, a good recessionary stock too. That's one thing you need to keep in mind is what sells good during a recession. Cheap cosmetics typically does. Alcohol typically does. Those are the kinds of things you want to be watching for when you're looking at these temporary moves in essentially the categories in which they are in. So roughly watching this, we'll see what happens. Continue to buy, in my opinion, here. Again, if it drops down anything below this 88 mark would be a good entry point, a really good entry point as well. I think both really solid supports. I've had nothing but selling, so going into the new earnings, I think we might get some stronger results, especially going into Q4 for all the holidays. We might get one more bad earnings, may drop us down here to the 87. And I think as long as it holds there, I think we can start pushing back up, even despite a price in a recession, because it's already corrected quite a bit. So let's see. Then we'll take a look at NVIDIA. Very concerned about NVIDIA and a lot of the news that's been swirling around this. So I think you need to be really careful. As of right now, it's gotten rejected off the 126. Currently holding support at the 118. Your next level being at the 105 mark. Again, these are monthly candles, but it can move a lot very quickly. Given a lot of the uncertainty, I expect this to potentially maybe chop within here. Just waiting for earnings to see what happens. And then once earnings happens, it might potentially try to go for the 132. Again, you're going to start hitting where, just like we saw with ELF, where you've had the massive year-over-year growth, and it dials down to even still a very, very, very impressive earnings. But nonetheless, it's not these massive growth numbers, and then the market starts really correcting after that, and so you get some sort of correction, and then it'll stabilize and then start pushing back up. But you have to give that time. It's had a massive run to this point to think it's just going to massively start pushing up again. I think, especially with all the drama going on with SMCI, you have to understand that NVIDIA is very closely tied to that. So with all the managing of numbers over there, that could potentially fall into NVIDIA, and that could be a downfall for NVIDIA too. So you have to be very careful with that. That's why it's good to pay attention to what's going on with specific stocks, especially if you're invested in that stock. Even if you're doing a temporary swing, you still want to know what the current events are, just to be aware of that. And to bring that in reference here, SMCI, again, we've had a massive candle down because of that news. Essentially, potentially fraudulent numbers. So it looks like we may be retesting here, potentially even going lower for this one. You got pretty solid support here at that 333 mark. So just keep that in mind. Again, miscalculating in numbers. So this earnings cycle might actually be really, really bad for this. And this comes out in about a month. So we'll have SMCI, and if those numbers, that news that came out already, typically if it's going to be a bad earnings, they would announce it about 30 days out, and they just did that. So you need to keep in mind what that's going to look like. So this earnings might be really bad for SMCI and for NVIDIA in the next month. So despite this push up or attempt to push up, this is why you're starting to see Tesla go more parabolic, because they can shift the sentiment from just being AI to robo taxis. Now you're starting to see more use cases. This is why you're seeing Tesla pushing up. This is why you're seeing Palantir push up, because they have really good use cases for AI, and that's the next sentiment is what's going to matter. So now that you got infrastructure kind of out of the way, yes, infrastructure will still have some growth and do well over the next couple of years, but ultimately understand you're going to get more growth potential off of great use cases, and there's very few companies that are actually doing that right now. And the key is try to find the next company that can do it, that has proven results. So you got a lot of these co-pilots, AI co-pilots. That's not going to really soak in tons of profit for your company. It's going to be a useful tool, but you have to have something that's much bigger and larger than that to get some of these crazy growth rates that you're seeing in AI space. So, which again, there's very few actual cases, despite what everybody wants to bring up. But we'll see what happens there. And then Boeing, again, don't know why it's 150. This thing should be a $10 stock, but it's not with all the news that's come out. But again, it's heavily manipulated also by the government. So this is why it is what it is. But all you can see is this continue to fall and stagnate. So eventually looking this to come to 120, especially when we start pricing a recession. I wouldn't be surprised if this thing goes down to $100. $100 mark is a very stable level for the stock, even despite all the bad news. So just keep that in mind. And the heavy resistance being at that 165. So watching those levels there. And our glorious JP Morgan. We'll see what happens here. Again, we got earnings coming up. Have some heavy resistance at the 215. Support here roughly around the 200. It only moves about $5 increments potentially during the week. They are pricing a little bit more this week, as there could be some big news dropping with non-farms and with essentially the Fed are essentially discussing whether they did a 50-point basis move cut. So that could bring a lot of volatility in the market. 11th, so we just got about 2 weeks out before this really starts potentially getting really big. So we got to watch and see what happens here. But ultimately, JP Morgan's really want to be watching if it starts turning over, which again, we've had quite a parabolic move essentially since we paused. Like I've talked about, all we've done has gone up. Now it's starting to get choppy because we've gone too parabolic. We need to correct 75 for this. You're kind of looking roughly around the 168 mark, maybe even 155 mark. I think would be plausible, just depending on how the rest of the continued sentiment is for the future here with the recession and the unemployment numbers. And again, there's going to be a lot of news associated with that to blame it on whatever the thing is. But like I've always stated, it's always essentially the banking system that's to blame. They just find a catalyst, whatever the flavor is during that time to try to drive it, as opposed to what the actual underlying problem is. So with that all being said, if you've made it this far, go ahead and drop a like. And until next time, I'll see you guys later.